Hello everyone, I'm Sanjana Uttappa. I'm part of the investments team at Headstart and I take care of investor relations and portfolio management. Today we are here as part of Startup September by Headstart, which is a month-long celebration of the entire ecosystem. What we technically try to do is we host various programs and initiatives spanning across different functions in the startup ecosystem, trying to add value to all different stakeholders in the startup ecosystem. So for the next 20 minutes, we'll have our hero fund of the day, that is Java Capital. And Anirudh has joined us here today from Java Capital, who happens to be the principal at Java Capital. He comes with a rich experience of about over 7 years in the investment space, and he was also responsible for setting up the Brigade REAP Fund in the past. Thank you, Anirudh, for taking your time and joining us here today.
Thank you so much, Sanjana. And thank you for Headstart for having me.
Before we kick started, the whole idea of Fund of the Day is to help founders understand the thesis of various funds and how they function. Because we often speak a lot about how to evaluate a startup and how should startups prepare their pitch deck, what do investors look for in the startups, but we've also wanted to help the founders understand what could be the right set of investors for them to reach out to, how to approach them, because a lot of them still write to everybody out there and they do get demotivated when they don't get a response. So the whole idea of the series Fund of the Day is to host a fund every day throughout the month of September. We are planning to host 30 different funds and understand their thesis and core principles behind each of the fund. So with that, trying to get kickstarted, why don't you give me a little overview about the kind of sectors that you focus into, kind of sectors that you focus into? I know I do understand deep tech is one of your core sectors, but there is always a debate on what is deep tech, and not everything qualifies as deep tech, and there is a very thin line between most tech startups and deep tech. So why don't you dive into the kind of sectors that you're?
Sure. So we are focused on deep tech, and the convenient thing is we look at B2B and across tech. So we're not constrained by what people define deep tech is. We essentially look at B2B across the board. Enterprise SaaS, deep tech being one of them, and the debate is how far does deep tech reach, right? So deep tech could be your typical Gen AI, it could be your metaverse, it could be AI, ML, it could be across the board. We just look at specific B2B use cases within that. It could be hardware, software. We're not restricted to that. It can extend even to your climate, sustainability, life sciences, pharmaceuticals as well. I mean, I was just having a conversation about this with a circle of deep tech investors yesterday because we were trying to slice and dice the policy that came out. And I think the policy is actually fairly well framed what deep tech covers, and it covers these areas that I just mentioned. Apart from that, we are clearly focused on climate and clean tech, right? So in climate and clean tech, also where deep tech falls in, we look at your alternative materials, your material sciences, your carbon capture. We can even look at battery sciences. We can look at components in EVs across the board. So it's a fairly broad thesis, conveniently so. And that's essentially what we look at as sectors.
And what stage of startups do you typically invest in? Is it early stage, growth stage, or a mix of both? Like, what stage of startups do you invest in?
So the early stage investors, where we typically come in is at the pre-series A seed stage, right? Ideally, we like being the first institutional check that comes into a company post the friends and family round. But that being said, a lot of deep tech companies typically need a lot of capital to build what they're researching on a build product, and the gestation cycles tend to be typically pretty long. So you're not going to necessarily be able to just wait for a friends and family round to get validation. So we can step in early there. We've done that in the past, right? We've made space tech investments. We've made investments in flying taxi companies. So in those cases, we can get in a little early. There needs to be something pretty strong in terms of the technical research that they've done. There needs to be some core identifier IP under the hood for us to get some validation and comfort out of. So those sort of companies need capital. So we can be stepping a little early. That's how we typically operate.
That's right. I do understand deep tech typically is a capital intensive business or a startup. So what would be the ticket size that you typically range, like a minimum to maximum, or what is the ticket size that you see?
So we teeter around the range of about a crore to say about three and a half, right? We can go up and below that case basis. We're happy to look at opportunities. We're not too cemented on that. We so this will be at the pre-series, A seed, and pre-seed stage, as I mentioned. We also have capital reserve for follow-on rounds, right? So if we're picking the company and we've decided to back them, we're very happy to double down going forward, and we've done so in the past with a bunch of portfolio companies as well.
Got it. And you just mentioned about you also invest in on their subsequent rounds in a few of the startups, right? So what could be some of the metrics or factors in deep tech specifically, if you can help a few founders understand? What could be some of the metrics that will make you believe, okay, the startup is doing good in our portfolio, we should probably continue to have a majority stake. What could be some of those metrics in deep tech?
Sure. Um, it changes from company to company, right? Especially when you're in the research phase and you're trying to prove commercialization of a product. We keep certain milestones in mind, right? So as you achieve them, if your tests are achieving out right, if you're getting the right results that you had planned on, if commercialization seems very viable, it's worth putting in money in there and exploring that. So that's how we typically operate, and this changes from company to company, right? Some companies hit commercialization a little quicker than most. Some, if you're dealing with life sciences or pharmaceuticals, I mean, the preclinicals can go well, and that's a decent validation for us, and we can probably progress on that. If you're dealing with space tech, I think if you get certain approvals in place, if your research is speaking for itself, you're getting good validation from stakeholders that could potentially use it. Those are good metrics for us to really take calls on to progressively invest. But that being said, we understand that deep tech sometimes this doesn't always check the box, right? It's patient capital at the end of the day. So we're happy to wait around, but typically we have some sort of milestones in mind that typically work.
Got that. I also know that Java Capital focuses a lot on non-metro cities as well. So help us understand geographically, do you have any locations that you all are very keenly looking into, any tier 2, tier 3 cities? Because there's a lot of disruption happening in non-metro cities in India today. And I understand a lot of investors are taking interest now. And I also know Java Capital is one of those. So what are different geographies that you're trying to reach?
I can't say that we're restricted to any specific geographical sectors. I mean, we're an India-focused fund. I mean, if you're solving a problem for India for a global perspective, happy to take a look. And also, I think what happens is we set up an office in Coimbatore as well, right? Because we felt the need to kind of be there and see the sort of innovation coming out of there. This entrepreneurial spirit is a fairly strong thing, and it tends to be concentrated to the major cities. And in that instance, I think people tend to avoid the smaller towns. Coimbatore is not a small town, but there's a lot of innovation happening there that tends to get skipped upon. So a lot of these cities tend to be in industrial belts, right? So they're solving problems within those industrial belts. So if you're in a textile belt, there are B2B solutions that can really solve problems for them. If you're dealing with an automotive sort of belt, it solves problems for them as well. So industry and innovation tends to kind of work with each other. We see states also kind of have innovation that way. If you look at the SaaS sort of innovation happening in Chennai, it's so specific to Chennai with the sort of innovation that it's had there. And every region has that. So it's important for us to step into those areas and not miss out on those really compelling problems being solved by these startups. So Coimbatore is a great way for us to tap into that by having an office, and we've actually invested in a company called Frigate from there as well.
Interesting. That's nice. I would like to bring in a few perspectives from the founder's angle. Is there any common mistakes that you often see founders do while approaching investors, or have you seen founders not covering what they should ideally be covering, or covering what is not relevant? What could be some of the common mistakes you have seen founders do while approaching investors?
Sure. I think you touched upon it in the very beginning a bit, right? I think one major issue that happens is founders just carpet bomb investors, right? Every investor has a very specific thesis. It's very important to understand that investors get a lot of deals every month, and for them to actually look at that and notice it, it has to fit their thesis. So I guess founders, considering the fact that they don't have too much bandwidth, right? I mean, it's hard enough running a business. I think focusing on the right investor is extremely important. And I think looking at their past deals, and most of them are quite public about the sort of deals that they do and what sort of work that they do. So focusing on the right stage, if you're raising a seed round, if you're raising a pre-series A round, focus on the right investor. Make sure you're focusing on the investor that invests in that space. Have they had a past trend to invest in, or are they open to it? Have they vocalized the fact that they're open to these areas? I think targeting it that way is really important. Apart from that, I think a lot of founders have to understand that if it's a deep tech problem, it is a complex problem, right? These founders have spent their entire career building this solution, right? And it's come through PhDs or whatever research papers, so on and so forth. Not everyone's going to have that knowledge. And as deep tech is vast, you're going to have to explain that to a VC. I mean, we're supposed to be generalists, at least that's how I take it. So I think it's important to kind of explain the business model, explain what's being built on the hood, what the vision is. That is really important. I think focusing on whether there's a market that you're addressing, how the product will address that and solve pain points within that. And this applies even outside of deep tech, to be honest. So I think it's important to address that. I think overcomplicating, I think that can be had being built, but keep it simple. That's how I approach it. That's how I think most VCs do. 300 deals a month is typically what a VC sees, anywhere between 200 to 300. Keep it simple, keep it clear. What's the value prop? What are you solving for? How large is the market? Is there a competition? Crystal clear. Yeah. And yeah, it's fairly simple to understand and done that way.
Having said that, like you rightly mentioned, in deep tech is pretty vast, and not everybody comes with expertise of deep tech. So as an investor, evaluating a startup's team is something very core and primary that you do. So how do you go about evaluating talent or team? And if a startup wants to expand their team, how do you go beyond the capital and help them expand their team and help them find the right kind of investors the right kind of team in deep tech?
Startup founders, how we evaluate them, I think there are multiple ways, right? I mean, it's early stage. There's quite a bit of information asymmetry at that stage. It's not like stock market investing. So you accept that as a VC investor. That's the truth of what the industry is. When you're assessing a founder, I think it really matters what sort of work they've done in the past. I think if you're doing deep tech, it really matters what sort of research work they've done, how it's been published, what are the organizations that they're working with, the research tanks. I think there's some great ones around India. You know, you have IISc, you have the C camps, you have the BIRACs. How it's working with them? Are they working with the labs and getting the results that they want? Have they done this in the past? It's good to understand what that backlog of work has been, or at least the repository of work that they've produced in the past. That's really important. After that, I think how they see application, right? You can have tech, and there's a lot of IP that's out there, and that's been a core focus also with recent policy level, is commercializing IPs that's existed under the hood at all these research organizations, but not seeing commercialization. So India's been extremely good at research. What is the commercialization potential and how you're going to go about doing it also really matters. It can't just be research for the sake of it. How you actually go about making that a viable business is very important. It can't just be the sciences of it, because you're building a monetizable business out of it at the end of the day. So that really matters. Clarity and thought with regard to that and the sciences of it both matter equally. How we help companies with hiring. Look, one thing we look with VCs, right? We don't get operationally involved in the company, but as a part of Perform, we are very happy to help companies out in terms of finding talent. So we do have our networks here and there across the board. I think over the years of us being in the ecosystem, we've gotten to meet some really interesting industrialists. We've got LPs that can really open doors and are happy to do so. We ourselves are happy to do that as well. So we can open those doors where they need experts. We can connect them to that. We keep a pretty close connect with a lot of these research organizations ourselves that can kind of help them validate what they're doing, or even give them access to talent, or institutions as well. So that's why we keep engaging with these labs and institutions. So that's something we can open for them as well.
And I have one last question for today. Is there any misconception about Java Capital in the founders' eyes, or anything that you think they haven't understood better that you want to probably address?
Misconceptions about Java Capital.
I mean, generally with respect to your fund, any misconceptions or anything that you think the founders haven't understood right with respect to your thesis? I mean, it's just an open question.
Not really. I think people have been fairly clear because our portfolio has been kind of frontier, right? When you're doing space tech and flying taxis, I think people kind of understand you're doing deep tech. So I think it's kind of concrete in most people's minds that we kind of do frontier bets. So we've not really had that challenge. But yes, I do occasionally get the consumer brand deal here and there. So I think the misconception I see on a day-to-day basis. But apart from that, I think we're pretty crystal clear in communicating what our thesis is, and people seem to get that with our portfolio as well. Maybe stage is something people tend to get wrong sometimes as well. So that's another thing as well.
Great. Thank you so much, Anirudh. I believe it wasn't a rapid fire, but it was a very insightful session. Thank you for bringing out what do you focus on, the kind, your core principles, and the whole idea behind your thesis. We loved having you. Thank you for taking out the time and being here with us today.
No, thank you so much for having me. I mean, loving the work Headstart has been doing. We've been at least I've been actively involved, engaging with you guys over the last couple of weeks. Yeah, thank you so much.